Appreciate that great introduction. We really want this to be a casual kind of conversation today, so we really value questions and input. So as Heather and I are talking, please feel free to unmute yourself and just ask questions or add it in the chat, and we'll answer those questions as we go along. As Christine said, my name is Heidi Brett-Baker, and I am one of the subject matter experts on the Project Success team. And I'm excited to be here today to share with you the journey that has been happening in Crown Point. Crown Point is one of my schools that I coach, and I'm really excited. It's my hometown as well. So I'm really excited that we are going through this journey together. So how we're going to run our presentation days is a little bit different than probably typical presentations. We're going to just really tell you about how the journey occurred, where it started, and where we are in the process, knowing that, as you know, in any journey, nothing always goes smooth, right? There's always been bumps in the road, there's been hiccups here and there, but there's also been many celebrations and many things that we want to talk about. So we are going to start, and I'm going to let Heather introduce herself, and we'll go from there.
Okay, I think I'm going to forward the slide.
There you go.
So hello, I'm Heather Paskus. I am currently the Director of Exceptional Education here for Crown Point Schools. This is my second year here in Crown Point. I had been up in Hammond for several years as a director as well. So this is my hometown as well. So I feel like a perspective of being a community member, a parent of children in the schools here, and then bringing some experience from a more urban environment has been extremely helpful. In the past, I served roles as a resource teacher at both the middle and elementary level. I have experience as an assistive technology coordinator, and then an assistant director and a director. Ever since Project Success's inception, I have worked with Amy, Meredith, and now Heidi for years now. So I appreciate their support and kind of our joint mission of improving outcomes for our students with significant disabilities.
Great.
So Crown Point has 10 schools. We have 1 high school, 2 middle schools, and 7 elementary schools. Our special education offices are housed at another building called the Learning Center. Currently, we house preschool programming and a high school alternative program. Next year, our district is starting a very exciting endeavor of offering community preschool at 4 of our elementaries, and here at the Learning Center, and 3 of our elementaries. So we will be able to provide an inclusive environment for all of our preschool students. So we're ecstatic about that. And then just last year, we started building an 18 to 22-year-old transition program. So next year, that program is going to be moving out of the high school and moving here into the Learning Center to give it an environment that more closely resembles life after high school. You can see our enrollment it grows every year. We're up to almost 8,800 and have over 1,100 students with IEPs. So our journey to get to this point, and I think it's important that I stress it is a journey. It's by far not over. We are not perfect in any sense, but we're doing the work, and we're doing the sometimes uncomfortable, very difficult work. But the way it all started was we attended, myself, 3 of our teacher leaders, and a few of our administrators attended last summer's Summer Institute. And it was at that training where we were introduced to the inclusive practices assessment. And I know in another slide, we'll have a little screenshot of that. And what we did was we had each of our building principals complete that inclusive practices assessment and rate themselves. I think as a cabinet, we reflected on those scores and then decided we needed to have some conversations with guiding questions with each of those administrators. We knew we could do more, and we had to, I hate to say give them a reality check, but we did have to give a little bit of a reality check to some of our administrators who were, for their knowledge base of inclusion, believed they were really doing a good job with inclusion. So those were important conversations that we scheduled a half hour at a time, at least, with each principal, myself, and then either the director of elementary curriculum or the secondary curriculum. I think another important piece that I should mention is we got a new superintendent this year, and the superintendent really brings an inclusive mind. We had some difficulties in years past with kind of getting buy-in at the district and building level, and he really started out the year with sending a strong message to the leadership here in the district that this wasn't going to be an if or maybe or some boxes we checked marked. This was going to be how we do business now. So his support has been huge in moving this. So anyhow, we had the 3 teacher leaders that worked all year with Project Success and the teacher leader cohort. And then those 3 schools specifically started the school year with an inclusive practices team and met monthly with the principal and representatives from all the disciplines. And then slowly we have more of our schools. By the end of this school year, every building has formed an inclusive practices team. And then our teacher leaders presented at the Capstone session on the work they had done all year. And then we have a commitment for the next couple years of work we're doing to continue the education in inclusive practices. And we have a 2-day session this August that will have 100 participants. We, at each principal meeting, which we meet monthly by level, we push out some inclusive practice work, whether it be an article, Shelley Moore videos, research articles, and then have them take that back to their building and share with their inclusive team and staff at large.
Okay, so Heather spoke to this just a little bit ago about that they attended the Summer Institute 2020. And if you're interested in any of that information, that can be found on our website, Project Success Indiana, and under regional trainings, under conferences and regional trainings, you would go to Summer Institute 2020. And in that, we really talked about engaging and building these teams. So Heather, who did you have attend your trainings? You had a couple of principals and a couple of teachers from various schools, correct?
Yep, principals, teachers, and then myself and our assistant director. Okay,
great. So that's how it all started for them. You're controlling slides, whoever's controlling slides.
I used to.
Yeah. So in that, one of the first kind of to-do tasks when we went through the inclusive practice Summer Institute is really to take an inclusive practice self-assessment. And this assessment really just helps us as a district, as a school, or even as just a teacher in your own classroom. It helps you think about how inclusive are you really? Are you really utilizing the inclusive practice theory and principles that we have set forth in our framework? And so, Heather, you had all your administrators do this, correct?
We did. We had each principal, we took some time to have them complete this. And I will tell you, if you take anything from today's session, I highly recommend having school leaders go through this assessment. What helped is I had buy-in from the superintendent and the directors of curriculum, and several of the central office staff has formerly been in the buildings as principals. So as results were coming in, you know, we could tell who really was honest and who maybe kind of overshot the mark a little bit. And so I just think this forces people to actually qualify how they're indicating they're inclusive, because I think it's a real easy term to throw out. And it's a discussion to this day that certain principals will approach me and say, I still can't believe, like, I really thought I was an inclusive leader. I thought I was promoting this kind of framework for students. And that assessment really made me check myself and check what I do as a leader. So again, if you do anything, I highly recommend having your folks participate in this assessment.
And again, that can be found on the website. So the results, like you just talked about a little bit, were some were shocked and some people were not so sure about it, right? They really thought, and I think sometimes, because I've talked to many of your principals that you've talked about, some were saying, well, we do, you know, we were inclusive, you know, our students went to art, music, and gym, or we included students in the lunchroom, but that's not really what the inclusive framework is. It's really about being totally inclusive, right? And that we're thinking about all students and not just some students. And so tell us about how those crucial conversations went.
I think really just kind of putting it out there, putting their results out there. And for those that had indicated they were maybe in the innovative phase, even the application phase, we were really asking for evidence. So, okay, here's how you scored yourself on this question. What is your evidence of that? I think the other important part of those conversations was we started them with, here's your quick wins. So you haven't been including maybe students applied skills programs in a general education class list or what have you, or giving them the opportunity to earn the same awards as other students. There's a quick win, like right there, there's where you can start. So we definitely started with the positives of the things we do see and the folks that are trying to move in the right direction. And I think we will start the school year in the fall and re-administer the assessment and kind of look and see if we see any changes.
Awesome. Awesome. So you talked about those crucial conversations. What I really like that has happened since those crucial conversations, and I think it is really setting the stage for your district, has been how your administration really is making it a priority for your district. And one of the ways they're making that a priority is that at every cabinet or every principal meeting, you guys are discussing some kind of piece of evidence about inclusive practices, whether it be an article, a Shelley Moore video, or a project success template. Tell us about those different things and tell us about those conversations that happen once you've presented those at one of those meetings.
Sure. So one of the things that was helpful to me was just knowing the personalities and how to effectively approach, like what evidence I could give each principal to get some buy-in during those conversations. And for some of our principals, they want to see research. So something that was helpful was, if you've seen the research Dr. Sandy Cole and Dr. Hardy Murphy have done on how ISTEP scores were raised for students included in high inclusion settings. Some of my principals needed that. Some of my principals needed explicit examples and just, here's what you have to do. Here's what you need to do. some of them, the videos were huge because they showed those to their greater staff, and those, the Shelley Moore 5 More Minutes videos are very well received. They're very entertaining. They're short, they're sweet. And then also our central office was restructured. So this department went from being exceptional learners to exceptional education. And the umbrella has kind of opened up, and we will be all encompassing high ability, ELL, special education. So that was another kind of a PR move we had to do, was don't just make it about special ed, because it's not just about special ed. It's about diverse learners overall. So that approach was helpful. Did one conversation do the trick? No. I mean, we're still having these conversations. We're still, you know, it's interesting. We're building a new middle school here, and then we're doing some renovations to several other buildings. And with that has come conversations about how to lay out a building. And, you know, when we were included in the first plans for the new middle school, they had the applied skills room and ED room right next to each other. And we said, no. And just getting people to think, like, you don't have to put classrooms, self-contained classrooms in one area. Like, shouldn't just be down that hallway that nobody walks down. So for us, inclusion has even become about how a building is designed, and adding preschools to different buildings, and we're going to have accessible playgrounds within the next 2 years. So this wasn't just even limited to a conversation about that one assessment. It's been so broad. It's been about all the things that are going on here.
Yeah, it makes me smile, because it makes me so happy that you're well on that journey, right? You're about setting norms. The norm is to be, when you're planning any kind of thing, to be thinking about all students, and not just the majority, but so that we are meeting the needs of all students, and that's really exciting.
And I have to say, just one more thing, the playground conversations have been so interesting, because you know, I don't think people realized how the playgrounds are inaccessible, and you know, mulch, having to wheel a wheelchair through mulch, or having a step up to get into the playground space. We're going to have communication stations outside of each playground, and that really kind of rocked even the building design folks' world. They had never seen that before. They didn't know what that was. So I think just bringing an awareness and kind of being that squeaky wheel. If you're not constantly the squeaky wheel, they will forget.
Neat. Well, you know, that brings us to, you know, we're really talking about that journey, and how it's a journey. How it's a journey piece, and how we're talking a lot about administrators right now, how administrators got on board. And not only did you have to get them on board, you had to get some staff on board. And so the natural way to do that oftentimes is to single out those leaders, right, who will be the spokesperson, be that squeaky wheel, be that advocate that we were talking about. And so you had an opportunity last year to have some teachers become teacher leaders, and have a whole year of intense training with our staff, with our project success staff. And so tell us how you decided who to recruit, or did people come to you? And what do you think were the advantages of the outcomes of this program?
So the first teacher there is Jennifer Chiquina, and she has a well-established reputation here in Crown Point as a special educator, and has always promoted best buddies. So she was kind of a natural leader to recommend, as she's been doing the work of trying to sort of meld gen ed and special ed, especially in peer relationships. The other bonus was that we moved Jennifer into a building that had never had applied skills programming before. So her expertise in including students with this building that had elementary building had never had any kind of applied skills programming. It just really took off. They have received our students and our mission very well there at her building. The next teacher is Christina Curtis, and she's a teacher in a classroom that was previously named like the autism classroom. Well, we're really moving away from those disability specific classrooms, and now she's an applied skills teacher. So she has always shown leadership potential, especially in advocating for her students there at the building and to get them out and think bigger than specials. You know, it's more than specials. And then Mandy Nelson, the last teacher, she is one of our middle school applied skills teachers. And her building and her classroom happen to be right next to my building. And boy, that's the classroom I go to when I need a pick-me-up, because last year even she had, I think, 14 students and 6 paras, and I never saw anybody disengaged. Everybody's engaged, moving out, moving here, and always, Mandy's always thinking of the next step. How can I improve this? How can I get this student out more? Capitalizes on their strengths, and really has moved out of her comfort zone to being one of those teachers who primarily just works with other special educators to now collaborating with general educators and getting the opportunities in place for them to get out in gen ed. So these are 3 great advocates for kiddos with disabilities.
Thanks. And so I know we talked a little bit, you said this a little bit earlier, but one of their, so in the teacher leader cohort, one of the things that you have to do, we do a problem of practice where we let our teacher leaders at the beginning, very beginning stages in early October, they picked a problem or a practice in their area, in their school district, that they wanted to work on all year and support that project. And then we culminate that with the Capstone experience. And so these 3 ladies chose to go together as their capstone, and they really worked on the inclusive practices at Crown Point. And the main goal for them was to make sure that every school, and especially their schools, were very well formed, their team, their inclusive practice team, so that when they started the school year off, that they were really already on that journey to go. Every school building, I will say, in Crown Point, because I know the buildings, is in a different stage of the journey. I think everyone, depending on who their leader is, depending on if they have a teacher leader within that, that building, an advocate, or, the bigger buildings take a little bit longer. They are all on a different journey, but I would say Heather says at the beginning that all schools have formed an inclusive practice team. They all have, but where they're in that framework is a little bit different. And so I'll let Heather talk to you a little bit about that. I think she can tell you kind of where everybody is in the framework and what's to come for this school year.
Sure. So I think most of it I would attribute to the leaders' kind of approach and attitude towards inclusion. So the other issue here, I would say, would be size. So when we look at the high school, it's almost 3,000 students. And I would say that's one of the harder buildings to move, because there are some practices that are so ingrained, and to just make a few shifts in what we do impacts, there's 150 teachers there. So I would say that is the biggest challenge. It's like its own Disney World over there. It's almost its own little mini school corporation. So they have had co-teaching in place for a few years, and have had a lot of support in PD with co-teaching. But we all know as staff turns over, partnerships change, and you really need to revisit that every year. So for me, that's kind of my goal for the next year, is to really hit the high school because I just think it's the hardest to move because of the structures of high school, the credits. It's just, and it's a very high achieving high school. So when we approach leadership about, can we just have students that go into some of these general ed classes, and it can be an applied skills general ed class for them and have a very modified curriculum, that can be very off-putting for folks who have been content specialists all their life. The other piece we want to tap into there is they have some CTE courses at the high school with construction and auto tech and culinary. So that's also a goal of mine, is to tap into that programming for our students. The middle schools are really doing a great job. We have 2 very young leaders and they're eager. The one houses our emotional disabilities self-contained programming, and they, we gave them a mission that they had way too many kids in self-contained all day, and now they're down to 3% of their population is an LRE code 52. So that's huge. And then our other house is 3 applied skills classes. They're on their way. They have great inclusive teams. They're great. We're going to keep supporting them and helping them grow. And then our elementaries, I would say, are scattered because only, I think, 4 of the 7 house applied skills programming, only 1 house is ED programming, 1 is K through 2, 1 is 3 through 5. So there's a lot of differences amongst those buildings. But really, the principals are on board to do the work. So we have a lot to do.
All right. We talked this a little bit, but how do you, I know when we asked the teacher leaders to think about their capstone and stuff like that, how do you think the ladies decided on what their capstone project was? Did they come to you, or because you had already given that, you had the initiative in your district to give that inclusive practice assessment and they knew they were working on it? How do you think that they came about with their project?
So, because these ladies are on their inclusive teams at their building, once the principals did the inclusive assessment, they took it back to their leadership team and also completed it with their leadership team. So they were well aware of the results of their building's assessment, and then how a leadership team at their building felt as a consensus, a group, how they were doing on inclusion. And then I think just they really were dedicated to completing a project together. They're very conscientious, hardworking teachers, and I think they felt that support in working with one another on it.
Great. All right. So let's talk about what are the plans for this year. So you've alluded to a couple of things. You've said that you have a new superintendent. This is him right here, and he is very committed to working so that the school system, the school district, is inclusive, and that happens in many ways. Your board is on your school board is on board, and they know about inclusive practices. Your administrators are on board. So what will the plans be so that everybody else can get on board? You know, we certainly talked about that you have these inclusive teams in the building. That's going to help, but we know that it has to funnel out, right? It has to funnel out to your teachers, to your para-educators, to your support staff, to even your janitors, right? We want it to be everybody on board. So what will that look like for the school year coming up?
So we have a strategic planning. We're kind of in the first steps of strategic planning with our community, our staff, our board, and our leadership. And last year we had asked, the district had asked for Indiana University to come in and do a programmatic audit. There was some different leadership at the time, and there were concerns that there were some things not going on that probably should have been. So they came in and part of their recommendation was to increase the inclusive practices. So that got buy-in from the board right away. Then Dr. Terrell came in July. He saw the audit, you know, he always asks for my input, and he's been in other districts and has seen similar programming. So he knew the kinds of things we should be doing that we weren't doing at the time. So part of the strategic plan is going to be about inclusion. And like I said, the broad inclusion of all diverse learners and not just special education. Dr. Terrell is very clear that we don't talk about students and say those kids, their kids, our kids, that they are all of our kids, all of our students. The other really great thing he's done with the restructuring of central office is special education or exceptional education is now part of cabinet membership. They had never been before this year. So, you know, weekly I'm there at the table with other district leaders, and I keep, you know, bringing this up. We do work sessions every 2 months, myself with the rest of cabinet, and discuss inclusion, how we're evolving, what else we need to do. We look at the data of where we are for least restrictive environment. They've been super supportive in adding staff. We were grossly understaffed, and they have allowed us to add several staff members last year and next year. And then I am required to update the board each month at the board meeting. So we always try to hit some kind of inclusive topic to the board so they know that this work is continuing. We also have some parents who are like police or fire paramedics in the area who have children with disabilities, who are very vocal in praising the efforts they have seen. I mean, they will write emails to the board. I have shared some stories with the board at board meetings. So I think that community input is big as well.
Great, thanks. All right, it's time for questions. We wanted to leave some, the last 10 minutes or so, time for questions. If you wanted to ask us about anything that's been, that we talked about today, or anything that you might be wondering about if your district is just starting the journey, some takeaways or some lessons learned. So feel free to either unmute, we'd love for you to unmute and just ask questions, or share it in the chat box.